Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good evening, distinguished guests, scholars, and friends of the Dar. It is an honor to welcome you to this lecture on the profound and enduring history of the Islamic world and the field of Islamic archaeology. Through centuries of dynamic cultural exchange and intellectual pursuits, Islamic civilization has left behind a legacy that continues to shape global history. Today, we will not only revisit the historical narratives, but also uncover the tangible remnants of this past through archaeology, bringing to life the stories that has shaped our heritage. I'm truly excited to have our speaker, Professor Stephane Pradines, with an expertise in Islamic history and archaeology, to guide us through his journey of archaeological excavations in Islamic Cairo from 2000 to 2016. Professor Stephane is archaeologist and professor of Islamic art and architecture at the Aga Khan University Institute for the Study of Muslim Civilization in London. Specializes in Muslim military material culture, medieval trade in the Indian Ocean, and Swahili archaeology. He directed major excavations, including the Fatimid and Ayyubid walls of the Cairo, and field works across the Maldives, Kenya, Tanzania, and Comoros. From 2008 to 2015, he co-directed an international research program on medieval Middle Eastern warfare. Professor Stephane collaborates with NGOs like the Aga Khan Trust for Culture, UNESCO, and the World Monuments Fund on her heritage projects. And today, he will take us on a vivid journey into the fascinating archaeological work conducted in Islamic Cairo, starting with transformation of al-Athar Park by the Aga Khan for Culture in 1998. During the landscaping, the 12th century city of wall of Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi was uncovered, sparking a major archaeological project led by Professor Stephane. The project was initially focused on the park, extended to the study of entire eastern city walls, revealing nearly a millennium of history from the Fatimid to Ottoman periods. Excavations uncovered fortifications, architecture, and artifacts, and contributed the establishment of the largest field school in Islamic archaeology in Egypt and the Middle East. Please give a warm welcome to Professor Stephane Pradines to guide us through his remarkable discovery.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I would like first to thank Sheikha Oussa Al-Sabah for her kind invitation and all the beautiful and fantastic people of Kuwait that I met since this morning and this afternoon. So thank you for your invitation. So tonight, as my colleague said, I will speak about our excavations in Cairo. And I will focus mainly on the walls of Cairo, the fortifications. Our project started in 1999, 2000. In fact, it was a project connected to the project of the Aga Khan Trust for Culture to create a panoramic park in Islamic Cairo, or Fatimid Cairo, if you wish. And this project, in fact, His late Highness, the Aga Khan, had this project for a long time, since the 70s, when he was talking to his friend Hassan Fatih. And he realized he started this project in 1998 with the landscaping phase in Cairo. And rapidly, between 1998 and 1999, they found a huge part of the Ayyubid wall built by Salah ad-Din by the end of the 12th century. So the Aga Khan Foundation decided not only to build a park in Cairo, but also to restore and to do conservation work of the Ayyubid wall along the al-Athar Park that you can see here today. Our excavations were at the beginning located in the al-Athar Park and connected to the al-Athar Park. So it was a project that I directed with different teams. The project was supported by the Aga Khan Foundation, the Aga Khan Trust for Culture, and I was working for the IFAO, the French Institute of Archaeology. But we received different support also, for example, from the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. As you can see on this plan, our excavation started next to the al-Athar Park, but rapidly we moved around the city from 2001 to 2016, and we excavated 5 sites around the Fatimid city. So what I have decided today is not to present you the excavations by site by site, but I will try to show you what we found connected to the Fatimid walls in a kind of chronological order, because I think that it will be easier for you to understand our discoveries if I start by the oldest discoveries from the most recent. So it was the first time that we were able to excavate in Fatimid Cairo. Basically, all the archaeological excavations in Islamic archaeology done before were not done in Fatimid Cairo, but they were done to the south of Fatimid Cairo, in an area that we call Old Cairo, or also Fustat. It was the first Arab capital city of Egypt, founded during the Arab conquest of Egypt. And most of the excavations were located to the south. Only few test pits were realized in the north of Islamic Cairo and Fatimid Cairo, and we were very lucky to open large-scale, open area excavations. So as I said to you, I will really focus on one of our main discoveries, or discoveries, if you wish, the Fatimid walls, and then the walls of Salah ad-Din, the Ayyubid wall. So, as you probably know, the Fatimid dynasty ruled first Tunisia, and then they moved in 969 from Tunisia to Egypt. And one of the first things that the general Jawar al-Sikili did for the Fatimid Caliph al-Mu'iz, it was to build a new city for the new rulers of Egypt. So he built the city called the Victorious, Al-Qaira, to the north of Fustat. And this city was protected by a city wall built by the general Jawar al-Sikili. But we didn't know anything about this wall before our excavations. So basically, this wall was known only by Arabic primary sources. But we didn't have any material evidence of this wall. For the second Fatimid wall, it's a bit different. The second Fatimid wall was built by the vizier or the wazir Badr al-Jamali by the end of the 11th century. It was built for the Caliph al-Mustansir. And this wall, you can still see some pieces of this wall, and I will come back on these beautiful Fatimid gates later. So as I said to you, I will present the excavations in a chronological order, not of the excavations, but of the structures and the wall discovered. Here you can see the 3 sites that we excavated to the north of Fatimid Cairo. And on these 3 sites, we found the oldest Fatimid wall built by the Fatimid and by the general Jawar al-Sikili. This Fatimid wall, you can see on the map in green, is strangely located between the 2 other walls protecting the city. You have the Fatimid wall of the general Jawar al-Sikili from the end of the 10th century. Then you have another wall, the second Fatimid wall, from the end of the 11th century. And then Salah ad-Din built later a stone wall in front of these 2 previous walls. So I will start by a chronological order, by the oldest one, the second Fatimid wall, and then we'll end up with the Ayyubid wall of Salah ad-Din. So on our excavation, one of the oldest walls that we found is this wall. This wall was not made of stone, was not made of mud bricks. This wall was made of tabia, or tapia in Spain. It's a technique that we call in French pisé, or in English rammed earth. And this technique is almost unknown in Egypt. Only in the west of Egypt, close to Libya, for example, in the oasis of Siwa, we have this kind of constructions. The rest of Egypt, as you probably know, the rest of the things made of earth are made of mud bricks and not pisé. So it was for us really a major discovery to find that the oldest structure was this first Fatimid wall. You can even see that we found in the walls the traces of the beams, the wooden beam, to hold, the coffrage, the wooden planks, to hold the pisé when you are doing these walls in pisé. You have an explanation here with some workers in Morocco doing some pisé wall, between the wooden planks, and we found even the traces of the beams used to build this wall built in 969, 971. So we were lucky to find the same wall, the same pattern in two different sites. Another site that I showed you previously, the site of Al-Mashtal, that we excavated only for 1 year. We found again 3 walls, the oldest wall made of pisé, rammed earth, the second wall Fatimid wall made of mud bricks, and in front of them, the wall of Salah ad-Din. It's probably a bit easier to understand here. The first Fatimid wall made of pisé, with the traces of the beams here. The second Fatimid wall made of mud bricks, and the last wall built by Salah ad-Din by the end of the 12th century here. Please forget about this kind of strange circle in the middle of the walls. It's because digging in Fatimid Cairo is something very complicated. It's what we call urban archaeology. So you don't have only Fatimid period and Ayyubid period, but then we found also Mamluk structures and even Ottoman structures. So the Mamluks, they were not archaeologists, and they didn't care about the Fatimid wall, so they dug and they created this well, this kind of pit. So they basically cut, the Fatimid wall. Yes, you can see again this Fatimid pisé wall. Yes, in yellow. And then the second Fatimid wall made of mud bricks that I will describe later. And then we excavated on the north a third site called Bab el-Nasr. This site is located exactly to the south of the monumental gates of Bab el-Nasr that you probably all know, because they are absolutely beautiful and very famous in Cairo. And on this site, we were very surprised to find not only the first Fatimid wall built by the general Jawar al-Sikili by the end of the 10th century, but we also found the first Bab el-Nasr. So basically, the first gate of Cairo built by the general Jawar al-Sikili. Here, our story starts to be a bit more complicated, because instead of building, this gate in pisé or rammed earth, the general Jawar al-Sikili built this gate in stone, in limestone. And you will see that it's a general pattern with the Fatimids. They built their wall with pisé, rammed earth, or mud bricks, but then they put a lot of money and attention to the gates. Why? Because for the Ismaili Caliph, the Fatimids, the gates were very important for the Fatimid ceremonials. So they wanted to impress their visitors, but also for the Ismaili ceremonies, they wanted to have monumental and beautiful gates. It's the reason why even the first Fatimid gate that you can see here was built in limestone and then was connected to the Fatimid rammed earth that we found. And here you can see the massive wall built at the back from the time of Badr al-Jamali. Here in yellow, the first Fatimid wall, and then in red, the second Fatimid wall. End of the 10th century, end of the 11th century. Here on this map also you can see the monumental gate of Bab el-Nasr that you all know if you have visited Cairo, and you can see in brown what was in fact the first Fatimid wall. So the first Bab el-Nasr was located a little bit to the south. And by this discovery, we also responded to some questions of historians, because nobody knew why the Fatimid wall was not straight, to the north. When you look at Bab el-Nasr, the wall of Bab el-Nasr is going to the south. And it was a strange, feature, because normally the wall should be straight. And in fact, it's because Badr al-Jamali connected his wall to the first Fatimid wall. So by finding, the first Fatimid wall, we found also the explanation why the wall was going to the south. Yes, this is the site that we excavated. We found also some very interesting features with some marble columns, inserted, in the masonry of the wall, a little bit like what you can find even now today in the second Fatimid wall. And here in blue, you have the second Fatimid wall that I was mentioning. So the second Fatimid wall, you probably all know the second Fatimid wall, built in 1087 and achieved in 1092. So the Fatimids started to build Bab el-Nas and Bab el-Futu, and they built the last gate called Bab Zuela in 1192. And this Bab el-Nas, of course, is extremely famous. You have another one to the north called Bab el-Futu, exactly located to the north of the southern gate, with very similar, called Bab Zuela. The only difference is that the Mamluk Sultan decided to build, his minarets, on the top of the Fatimid gate. And these Fatimid gates are also extremely interesting because they were built also in stone, and they were built by Armenian builders. So what is interesting is that Badr al-Jamali was an emir, a general, working for the Fatimid Caliph al-Mustansir. At the beginning, he was based, in northern Syria and in Damascus. When the Fatimid Caliph al-Mustansir had some problems in Egypt, military problems, he called, his emir from the Bilad el-Sham to help him in Egypt. And this Badr al-Jamali was Armenian, from, in fact, Christian origin. And when he came to Egypt, he came with his soldiers. Because what you need to know that in the Fatimid army was very diverse. You had a lot of Berbers, because the Fatimids came from North Africa. You had a lot of Nubians coming from the south of Egypt, from around Aswan, and called the Black Army. And you had also a lot of Armenians, officers, cavalrymen, and so on, and archers. So basically, when Badr al-Jamali came from Syria to build these new city walls for al-Mustansir, the Caliph al-Mustansir, he brought with him also some people from his area. And it's the reason why these gates look very much like Roman gates, because Armenian architecture was very much influenced by Byzantine architecture. Then you can see, of course, the northern walls built by Badr al-Jamali, this part. And that was the only thing that we knew about the second Fatimid wall. What we knew before our excavations was only what you could see. The good point with archaeologists is where we are digging under the ground to find new things, and mysteries. And we found the rest of the Fatimid wall of Badr al-Jamali. And it was, in fact, our first discovery. So I'm coming back in time. In 2001, when I started to work with the Aga Khan, we had this, what we call the archaeological triangle. The French are calling the place the parking d'Arassa, because it was a parking. It's not very poetic or philosophic. And the Aga Khan Trust for Culture is calling the place, they are calling the place the archaeological triangle, because it's a triangle located close to Mustashfa al-Hussein, very close to al-Athar Mosque. And on this site, it was in fact the first time that we found, the Fatimid wall of Badr al-Jamali. And we found different kind of features, not only the Fatimid wall, but we found also a Mamluk cemetery, we found Mamluk houses, we have also, of course, the wall of Salah ad-Din that you can see here. And we were very lucky to find some structures, Fatimid structures, were built before the Fatimid wall of Badr al-Jamali. So basically, in archaeology, we are, it's a little bit like in patisserie, with the stratigraphy. So each layer, it's a period. And so we were very lucky to find some structures, Fatimid structures, from the end of the 10th century, so prior to the second Fatimid wall. So for us, it was very important to establish a proper and serious chronology. So here we can see the Fatimid triangle, and you can see some of these Mamluk houses that we excavated, and with a street. And what we discovered too is that the Fatimid wall in mud brick was still standing in the 14th century and 15th century. It was described by the very famous historian called al-Makrizi. Al-Makrizi described this area in his Ritat, saying that it's an area called Ben el-Surain, the area between the two walls, because al-Makrizi saw the wall, of course, of Salah ad-Din, but he also saw the wall of Badr al-Jamali made of mud brick. Here you can see the walls that we found. It was our very first discovery. You can see that it was a massive wall made of mud bricks and on some foundations made of limestone. And you can see the previous Fatimid structures, so from the end of the 10th century. And you can see, even if you are not archaeologist, you can see that the foundations of this wall were built on top of these previous Fatimid structures. I think here it's even more obvious. You have this huge Fatimid mud brick tower from the time of Badr al-Jamali. The tower, you see the foundations? The tower was built on the top of a Fatimid garden and a Fatimid fountain. So for us, it was extremely important to establish the chronology and to be sure that we were in front of the Fatimid fortifications, but we were not sure that this fortification was built by Badr al-Jamali. So what we did, a few years later, in 2004, we excavated the site of Bab el-Tawfiq. You have here the parking Darasa, the mosque of al-Athar. We excavated the site of Bab el-Tawfiq, who is probably less known, than Bab el-Nas and Bab el-Futu, but it was a very important gate, called also Bab al-Barkia. This gate was the eastern gate of the Fatimid city. So we excavated Bab el-Tawfiq. It was a bit complicated because it's what we call urban archaeology. You see the level of the road. And this gate was well known. We didn't find this gate. It was excavated in the 50s, by Farid Shafi, an Egyptian archaeologist. But we cleaned the gate and we excavated around the gate. And what we found, first point, I wanted to show you an inscription of Badr al-Jamali from the time of the Caliph Mustansir. So the inscription in Kufik is in situ. So basically, like in Bab el-Nasr, you have a beautiful Fatimid inscription above the gate mentioning the work, the date of the work. So basically, the gate was built like Bab el-Nasr, Bab el-Futu, or Bab Zuela. The gate was built between 1087 and 1092. And our main discovery was the fact that we found the same Fatimid mud brick wall. You can see the mud brick wall that we found in the Al-Azhar Park, in the triangle, was going to the north and was connected to this stone gate. So for us, it was a kind of revelation. We realized that, in fact, Badr al-Jamali did exactly like Jawhar al-Sikili. He built all the gates in stone, in limestone, but the rest of the walls of the city were built with mud bricks. You can see that this gate was protected by two huge mud brick towers, you can see here and here. And we had in front of the gate what we call in Arabic a zalaka, a kind of ramp made of stone, of granite. Because, of course, I know that there is one Egyptologist in the room. Of course, when you dig in Egypt, you can find, pharaonic blocks everywhere. And these blocks were, in fact, from Heliopolis. So when the Fatimids built their city walls, they reused some stone from Heliopolis. So these blocks were published, and they are from Sesostris the first, that you can see here. We continued our excavation to the north, and we on the site that I showed you previously, Burj al-Zafar. And you can see that, again, behind, inside the city wall of Salah ad-Din in black, we found in brown, again, the Fatimid mud brick wall of Badr al-Jamali. You can see here a huge square tower, was probably actually the first Burj al-Zafar, the northeast corner of the Fatimid city. And we excavated behind the wall of Salah ad-Din and the gate called Bab el-Jadid, or Bab el-Kedid in Egyptian. And we found again the Fatimid wall of Badr al-Jamali, made of mud bricks, with the same kind of pattern, huge square tower and flanked with some counterfort of buttresses made of mud bricks. So now, let's have a break between the Fatimids and the Ayyubids, the Ayyubid dynasty, and let's talk about Salah ad-Din. You know that Salah ad-Din was Kurdish, and he was working for the Atabeg, of Damascus. And then the Fatimid Caliph Al-Adid, I think, called, the Syrians for help because the Fatimids were attacked by the Crusaders. And so the Syrians sent an army with Shirkuh and Salah ad-Din, his nephew, to support the Fatimids. So at the very beginning, what is interesting with Salah ad-Din was not the ruler of Egypt. Salah ad-Din became the prime minister, the wazir of the last Fatimid caliph. And what Salah ad-Din did, it started to protect Cairo even when he was the wazir of the last Fatimid caliph. So what you can see here, it's extremely interesting because it's a period which is not very well documented. It's the very end of the Fatimid period, but you have monuments built by Salah ad-Din. So he started to build some huge towers close to the Nile, Burj al-Maks, Burj al-Jafar, Burj al-Barkia in front of Bab el-Tawfiq, and Burj al-Marouk. These towers were located in the corners of the Fatimid city to protect the Fatimid city. So you can see Burj al-Zafar that we excavated. You can see that it was a multi-story tower, and the style of this tower was very Armenian in style, like Bab el-Nasr and Bab el-Futu. Even the features, with the small columns that you have in buttresses, in buttis that you can see in the base of the tower. Inside the tower, you can see this monumental vault with these typical Fatimid niches. So what is interesting with this architecture, it's not a Fatimid architecture, it's not an Ayyubid architecture. We are in between two dynasties. You can see a representation of Salah ad-Din in Al-Jazari manuscript. He's sitting on a throne, and you have the typical Fatimid reticulated niches that we found also in Burj al-Jafar. You have also the decoration with the palmettes, and these decorations are also typical of Fatimid architecture. Then what we did in archaeology is not only digging, we did also what we call building archaeology. What is building archaeology? You don't need always to dig. You can look at monuments and you can try to look at the different period in these monuments. For example, here you can see that the stones to the right and the stones to the left are different. Why? Because to the right, these stones are connected to the tower that Salah ad-Din built when he was the wazir of the Fatimid. But when Al-Adid died and Salah ad-Din took the control of Egypt, and then later took the control of Syria, he became the Sultan of Egypt and the Bilad el-Sham. And he continued this project to protect Cairo by one unique wall. You can see that he asked to his emir Karakush to build this wall to protect the city of Cairo. You can see Ayyubid, here it's the opposite, but it's the same wall from the outside and from the inside. So here what you can see here are the eastern walls of Cairo built by Salah ad-Din when he was Sultan. So basically, when I started to work with the Aga Khan, you see the al-Athar Park is more or less here, I started to work on the wall of Salah ad-Din, Sultan. And you can see that he built new gates. Salah ad-Din was not a poet like the Fatimids. He didn't give fancy names, to the gates. He called them Bab el-Jadid, Bab el-Jadid 1, Bab el-Jadid 2. And it's quite interesting. But these gates were very effective. You can see it's quite a kind of bent entrance to protect the city, protected by a moat, a dry ditch, and also a bridge. So these gates were really functional gates to protect the city against the Crusaders. You can see one of the Bab el-Jadid that we excavated close to Burj al-Jafar with a pile here and the bridge. And another gate, a similar gate. Here you have the al-Athar Park before, let's say, and after. And you can see the site that we excavated, the triangle. You can see the Burj al-Marouk, the corner of the Fatimid city. So basically, we are going to the south. And what is interesting, it's this this Ayyubid gate here, Bab el-Jadid number 2, Etnen, if you wish. And this gate was restored by the Aga Khan. So when you go to the al-Athar Park, you visit the al-Athar Park, actually you can literally walk on the bridge restored, the bridge from Salah ad-Din. And we were very lucky with the foundation because during the conservation work, we found an inscription from Salah ad-Din. This inscription was published by your colleague Frédéric Imbert, and this inscription is extremely interesting because you have the date of the beginning of the works and the end of the work by Salah ad-Din. So he said the works were started by Karakush on the order of Salah ad-Din in 1173 and ended in 1177 at the footsteps of the citadel. So here you have the whole project of Salah ad-Din. Salah ad-Din wanted to protect the different cities of Cairo. I mentioned to you that the first Arab city of Cairo, Islamic city, was Fustat. Then during the Abbasid and Tulunid period, the Abbasid governors and then Ibn Tulun built two other cities, al-Aqsa and al-Atay, around the mosque of Ibn Tulun. And then the Fatimids built for themselves a new city called al-Qaira. So what Salah ad-Din did, he decided to build a city wall of 14 kilometers long to protect Cairo from the Crusaders. The western part was only protected by the Nile, and in the middle, he built the Kalat al-Jabal, the citadel of the mountain of Muqattam, to protect the two cities. So here you have the citadel built by Karakush again, the Emir Karakush. I know that you have a lot of funny stories about Karakush, but actually this Emir was a very important Emir for Salah ad-Din, and he did a lot of important things, including the citadel with Burj al-Ramla, Burj al-Haddad here. And this citadel, in the citadel, the main gate turned to Darb al-Ahmar. The main gate called the Gate of the Steppe, Bab al-Mudarraj. You have also a beautiful inscription from Salah ad-Din mentioning the end of the work at the citadel. So the citadel was achieved in 1183. So you can see here a plan of the citadel, and in red you can see other towers built by the successors of Salah ad-Din, by his brother, and after also by his nephew. So Al-Adil and Al-Kamil. You can see these towers. If you know Damascus, you know that the citadel of Damascus was also refortified by Al-Kamil and Al-Adil. So basically, you have the same kind of towers in the citadel of Damascus. And then, of course, we didn't do only excavations, but we did a lot of surveys. So basically, what you have here is the locations of the Ayyubid wall that we documented, not only excavated, but documented. A part of the Ayyubid wall is now under an aqueduct built by the Mamluk Sultan al-Nasir, and the most important part of the Ayyubid wall is in the archaeological park of Fustat. So you can see here the remains of the Ayyubid wall in the archaeological park of Fustat. In desperate need of tarmim, of restoration, as you can see, with the same kind of bossage, on the stone. So this is, let's say, the last phase of the Ayyubid fortifications in Cairo. You can see a bit closer the same kind of walls that you have in the citadel of Damascus, with the same kind of ashlars, And then, of course, about the wall, our story about the wall didn't finish here. Cairo was occupied and controlled by the Mamluk sultans, then by the Ottoman governors when Egypt became a province of the Ottoman Empire. And here you have a very interesting map of Cairo by the end of the Mamluk period. You know that during the 14th and 15th century, Cairo had the Egyptians had a lot of problems like famine, but also plague epidemic with the Black Death. And a part of Cairo was abandoned. So basically, if we zoom, you can see, here it's the northern wall, and here it's the eastern wall that we excavated. And you can see all this area was abandoned and in ruins. And instead, the people reused the area to build a cemetery, tombs, graves. And it's interesting. Why? Because when you read a lot of books that I saw actually here, but in different libraries, a lot of scholars were wrong. When they show you, in history books, about Cairo, they show you this line, and in most of the books, it is mentioned that it was the limit of Fatimid Cairo. It was not the limit of Fatimid Cairo. We proved during our excavations that basically Salah ad-Din followed the two first Fatimid walls. You can see in yellow the first Fatimid wall built in 969 by Jawar al-Sikili. In red, you can see the second Fatimid wall built by Badr al-Jamali by the end of the 11th century. And in green, you can see the wall of Saladin, of course, continuing up to the citadel. So basically, it was a mistake from the scholars. Why? Because they used the map of La Description de l'Égypte, these volumes, published by the French expedition in Egypt when the French, with Napoleon, went to Egypt in 1798 up to 1801. And so basically, this line was the limit of Ottoman Cairo and not the limits of Fatimid city. And then when the French were in Egypt, they refortified, so they built a wall, was called the Wall of Kléber, and they also reused the Fatimid gates. So if you visit the Fatimid gates, you will see a lot of French names because they gave names, French names, to all the Fatimid towers. These names were, let's say, Shahid, you say Shahid in Arabic, French officers who died, during their service. And the French put the name of these French officers on the Fatimid gates. And you can see on the top of Bab el-Nas and Bab el-Futu, you have these big windows opening. They are not originally Fatimid windows. The Fatimids, they use what we call arrow slit niches, to use a bow or crossbow. These big openings were done by the French to put cannons against their enemies that they call in the archives Anglo-Turk. The enemies were the English and, of course, the Ottomans. And now, as a general conclusion, digging in Cairo, it was a huge challenge. And I envy, my colleagues digging in the desert and in the delta. And digging in Cairo, it is digging in, you say also in Arabic, in Egypt we say Zabal or Zabalin. This place was, Bourg al-Jafar was a village of Zabalin. So I remember when I visited this place for the first time, I thought, not a million years I will be able to excavate this place. And we were lucky that finally the Zabalin were relocated by the Department of the Antiquity, and we were able to dig this place. First, we had to remove all the debris, all the rubbish. Actually, a lot of Egyptians call me the Zabalin because they say, oh, Dr. Stephane, you spend half of your time removing plastic bag, half of your time removing, So they call me also the Zabalin. But you can see here, of course, we had to use huge machines. And also it was very important because in Egypt, it was not a tradition like that. So basically, with my colleague also that you probably know very well, Jean-Yves Empereur in Alexandria, we really introduced what we call rescue excavations or salvage excavations. So after a while, Egyptian antiquities, they were trusting us. It was a matter of trust after all these years. And they knew that we use caterpillars, but we stop before archaeological excavations. So it was only to remove debris, modern debris, or to remove, concrete and so on. So it was a matter also of trust. And here you can see with the Aga Khan Trust for Culture, you can now visit the place that we excavated. It's an archaeological park where you can see the Fatimid mud brick wall, and they did all the tarmim on the Fatimid mud brick wall. You can see the final product if you wish. I'm not selling you anything, but I wish you that you can visit the place. And you can see the wall of Saladin restored. And we also we didn't remove all the Mamluk houses because we wanted to show to the public what archaeology is, with different levels. So we kept some Mamluk street here and some houses, so you can see the different period and levels. And then I said to you, we were very lucky to excavate a Mamluk cemetery. This Mamluk cemetery is unique. I have a lot of colleagues all over the Bilad el-Sham. They are looking at us because we found the remains of a plague cemetery, Black Death cemetery. Why? Because we found what we call multiple graves. So in one pit, we found many people. Normally in Islam, you have one pit, one grave, one person, turn in the direction of Mecca. But here we found many people. They were correctly oriented. So they were Muslim graves, but because it was an epidemic time with the Black Death, they buried many people in the same pits. And they covered the people with lime, because of the epidemic. So we had let's say we were very lucky to excavate a big cemetery, but also the proof of what al-Makrizi and Imnias, describe, the plague epidemic in Cairo. And of course, because I visited, of course, Al-Sabah collection this morning in the storeroom, I was very lucky. So I have to say that it's when you find ceramics, they look like that. And you can see how they look like, but after some work of conservation and restoration, we were able to present, a lot of objects, for the Egyptian antiquities. Here I show you some Mamluk ceramics before. We were also lucky to find only one Fatimid dinar, but also because Egypt is a dry country, we found a lot of perishable materials, Mamluk manuscripts, Fatimid combs, a lot of Mamluk glass bangles, Fatimid keys, a lot of objects actually. And one of the things that I'm extremely proud is what I was saying to Salam this morning, is the fact that I'm very proud that we established with Dr. Osama Talat in 2006-2007 the first Islamic school, the first field school of Islamic archaeology. It was the first in Egypt, and it became the biggest field school of Islamic archaeology of Bilad el-Sham. So I'm extremely proud that we trained more than 100 Egyptian scholars. Some of them became very famous, like Ahmed al-Shawki, the former director of the Islamic Art Museum. I have colleagues now at Harvard, professors in Ain Sham University, and so on. So we did this field school for nearly 10 years, training students from all over the world, in priority, of course, Egyptians, but we have students, French students, Polish students, Belgian students, students from Germany. So it was really diverse. And of course, with international certificates. So yes, I would like again to thank you for your invitation, and I will be more than happy to respond to your questions. Thank you.